Live. Am I live? Am I live? 1 second. I'm going to plug in my audio again. So this is going to be fast. Let me know in the chat if you can't hear me, see me, if you don't comprehend, no comprendo, whatever. All right. I wanted to talk about this latest dust up with between Tim Pool, the independent commentator, some would say right wing. I don't really care to get into the labels, but very successful commentator, podcaster. I went on his show, as you know, like a month and a half ago, and he's gotten into a dust up with Dre De Matteo, former Sopranos star, Sons of Anarchy star, etc. Because basically, and we'll look at the tweet in a minute, but basically he said or implied that she was a hooker for posting provocative, sexy pictures. As I understand it, not nude pictures. In fact, I don't believe any of them, as I've been told, any of them. She's exposing anything that you wouldn't see in a lingerie ad or something like that. But these provocative, sexy pictures. And so Tim Pool posted this. And so I want to talk about it. I want to look at what he posted. I want to look at what she posted because they got into a dust up. And then I want to talk about, I mean, look, honestly, the thumbnail, the title of this video was really just meant to be an attention getter. I'm not going to spend the whole time talking about Tim Pool, but I wanted to take a little time before I go to work, and I am going to have to go to work, and that's why I'm doing this fast stream. I want to take a little time and talk about what's been going on the right wing or right of center or independent slash conservative media outlets, a lot of these commentators with regard to women. And so that's the larger conversation I want to have right here. But I want to talk specifically about this dust up between Tim Pool and Dre De Matteo, and my thoughts as someone who, as a woman who went on his show a month and a half ago. And if you watched that, I'll link to it below in the comments in a little while. But if you watched that show, that stream, it was a 2-hour live stream with Tim and also with Shane Cashman. If you watch that, we got into actually a lot of discussions of gender politics. And, one of the things that I really emphasize on my channel is that even though I am in some ways very conservative in some of my views, in other ways, I'm very liberal. We talk about, it's classically liberal, but no, also just very, in a modern, recognizable way, left wing. And so what ends up happening is that I, like a lot of people in this position, find myself sort of at times without a tribe on social media when people get into these inevitable arguments, whether it's gender politics or it's something else. And the term centrist, I I think that almost everyone loathes that term. Almost everyone hates the term centrist. Like if I go on like a right wing Reddit chat, or I go on a left wing Reddit chat, or if I look at the comments under left wing versus right wing videos, one thing that seems to be a similarity between both of them is that people on both sides seem to really hate the term centrist. And the reason why that is because centrist, unfortunately, it has this connotation of being wishy-washy. Well, I'm just kind of like, I don't really know what I believe. And I'm just like, kind of scared to say it. I don't really want to upset anybody. So I'm a centrist. Or, well, I don't really want to have to commit to one camp or the other. I want to keep my options open. And really, it's to my advantage as a podcaster, a YouTube commentator, to sort of keep my feet in both camps. So I'm a centrist. And so, yeah, I get that. That's the connotation that it has. And it drives a lot of people crazy because it seems wishy-washy, or it seems in some way perhaps even obfuscatory or manipulative, right? But when I say that I'm a centrist, what I mean is that I may have some beliefs that are pretty moderate that are shared by most of America, but I also have some beliefs that are very extremely to the right, and other beliefs, yes, that are very extremely to the left. And I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but I mean, I've talked before, and I did on Tim's show about my views on abortion and birth control and women's roles and the evolution of women's roles and right to die, euthanasia. And my views on these things are very, very to the left, and in some cases, extremely left wing. Whereas on the other hand, I have a lot of views on the right that would almost be the term anarcho-capitalist for those of you who know that term, right? But extremely libertarian. I want the government to leave me the alone. And so my point in this is not to try to sell myself to you as, oh, this is what I am. I'm a centrist, and let me explain why that's okay. But I'm just trying to tell you where I'm coming from with what I'm about to talk about. Because when it comes to gender politics and all that that encompasses, um, and I'm not getting into the trans thing because that's a whole other thing. And as some of you know, I have really big problems with the trans agenda. And I've done videos before talking about my issues with it. So that's not what I'm talking about when I say gender politics, but I'm talking about basically modern ideas about women and women's relationship to men and their sexuality and their place, their roles, their ideal roles in life and what they should and shouldn't be and what we should and shouldn't be encouraging women to do or shaming them into doing, right? That's what I'm talking about, okay? So, all that having been said, I find myself in a place where oftentimes I'm trying to explain to my left wing friends what the right is saying, and I'm trying to explain to my right wing friends how the left feels, right? And so that's where I'm coming from with this. Now, Tim Pool, he posted, hold on a second, I'm going to share it. It's hard to share things on here because it's hard to keep in my mind what I'm wanting to say, but one second. Okay, my attention was first drawn to this when actually Dre De Matteo, and I'm going to zoom in. She posted this on Twitter X. She said, "Well, I'm glad Timcast," and she tagged him, "clarified that I'm a hooker because he's a cunt. Keep saving America with your big influential platform by taking cheap shots at struggling single moms, tough guy. Super cool skater shit, bro." And then she signs it the hooker of Hollywood. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? And so she tagged, as you can see, she tagged or reposted Tim's comment. So let's look and see what this is. Or this was something that he posted. It wasn't a comment beneath anything. Okay, so Tim writes, women, oh, he's got a picture here, as you can see, of Dre De Matteo, and there's an article in Barstool Sports talking about how she made more in 1 month on OnlyFans than doing The Sopranos, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But then, so Tim says here, women deciding to be hookers instead of having jobs is an arc I didn't expect feminism to take. So look, you can see why Dre De Matteo would take offense to this, since generally in our society, and certainly among conservative leaning people like Tim Pool, being called a hooker is not a good thing. Okay. So, I mean, people who are saying, oh, well, he didn't really insult her. Come on, let's just get real. Okay. Let's cut the shit. You call someone a hooker is not a good thing in this context. All right. In the way he's doing it. Now, then some people are saying, well, he wasn't calling her a hooker. He was saying it in a general sense as talking about the phenomenon of, I guess, OnlyFans or women being increasingly sexualized in our society, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I don't know. You got a picture there, Tim, of this woman, and you've posted it, and it's an article about this woman and her doing OnlyFans. And then you say women deciding to be hookers. Which women are you talking about, pray tell? Is it really that big of a leap to say, oh, I think he's talking about Dre De Matteo? Okay, so let's not pretend that we're all stupid and we don't know what you're doing. Now, I'm not saying it's not within your purview to do that, but I'm just saying, like, let's not be cute about what we're doing here. And so I think that, obviously that made her very angry. And I don't say that I endorse everything that Dre De Matteo said in her response to him. And she posted some stuff on Instagram as well. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it either, but You could tell she was, you could see that she was angry. And then one of her friends jumped in and said some things that probably were not helpful to the conversation. Well, definitely weren't, about Tim not being able to locate the clitoris or something like that. So I'm not endorsing any of that. But I do want to talk about this topic here because look, there are two things that, well, there's several things that bother me. But first of all, apparently it was very easy to find this out. Dre De Matteo does not have any nude photos on OnlyFans. Okay, so it's not showing what you'd see in Playboy or anything like that. Now I understand. Yes, there are pictures of her in lingerie and sexy, seductive poses, and I'm not denying that that is sexual. Yes, of course, obviously, you look at that. You could also say, oh well, it's aesthetically interesting or what have you. But look, we all know that most people, if not all, who are paying OnlyFans to look at pictures, they're looking at them for the sexual aspect. Okay. So, we can't deny that either. But first of all, to call her, and yes, he did, to call her a hooker for that. I mean, there are definitely levels of things. Okay. And so, in my mind, at one end of the spectrum, we have people who are daily engaging in or regularly engaging in sexual intercourse for money. And I don't even want to get into that, whether that's right or wrong or not, because it's a very complicated answer. And I look at things in terms of harm, what is harming people or not. And also, I also look at the fact that the government doesn't seem able to regulate anything without making a complete ridiculous mockery of the whole enterprise. So anyway, but someone posting sexy photos on OnlyFans is just not even in the same ballpark. And I understand that it's still sexualizing the body, or it's profiting off of the sexualization of the body. But can we get real about the fact too that almost everyone online does that? you know, we don't think about men giving as much attention to their appearances when they go on a podcast or when they go on online or what have you. But I mean, can we just be honest about the fact that like Tim wears that beanie cap all the time, and I think it looks great, by the way. I think Tim looks great. Tim wears that beanie cap all the time, because he thinks that it makes him look better, or also he thinks, well, this is my trademark and it's very recognizable, it's good branding. But either way, that is a capitalizing on something that is entirely superficial. And I think that one of the problems with the right, traditionally speaking and still today, is that they may have legitimate critiques about society being over sexualized or not, and critiques about society in a number of ways getting too far beyond a healthy, time tested traditional model of things. They have some legitimate critiques there, but they seem to carry with it all of this just really hyper determined prudishness, I guess, is the term that I'm looking for. And and I do think, and I'm not calling Tim Pool now a misogynist or anything, but I think there is at times some unconscious, not misogyny, let's just say resentment of the power that the opposite sex holds over us all. Or if we're homosexuals, if we're gay, then it's the same sex. But I'm talking about the paradigm for most people that we exist in our lives, is that at various times in our life, we are all basically emotionally and psychologically held hostage by the opposite sex. That's what love is. You fall in love, and your sense in your intelligence goes. And then for years after, you're trying to figure out what happened there and what did it mean, right? Well, I totally get resenting. I totally get straight men resenting women, because women have a great deal of psychological and emotional power over them, and sexual power, and all of these things. And as cool as that may be, or as necessary as that may be from an evolutionary perspective, or what have you, and as much as that ushers in, wonderful things like, commitment and deeper levels of interaction and what have you, but it also because it is so powerful, it also leads to a kind of a psychological enslavement. And I think that there are a lot of, and I'm not talking about Tim here, I'm just talking about in general, like unconsciously or semi-consciously, I think there's certainly a great resentment of women because of the power they have. And on the flip side, I think women have a lot of resentment toward men for the kind of power that they have, or what have you, or perceived power, what have you. And so And so when I look at a tweet like Tim's and I think, he could have phrased that in a way that would still have gotten across his main idea, which is perhaps society is over sexualizing people, and perhaps it is inordinately celebratory of superficiality, and we should be encouraging men and women, everybody, to maybe, be a little more, go a little deeper, be more substantial about the way they're living their lives. I mean, okay, you could have that conversation, but just to get on there and say, oh, modern women turning into hookers. I'm not sure. I know that it probably gets him some new male followers, but I'm just not sure in the long run that that is like really the best way to present the arguments he's trying to make. And let me just say something as well. I have been totally guilty. I've been doing YouTube and social media for 3 years now, a little over 3 years. And I have been totally guilty and continue to be totally guilty of, at times, using really sharp, biting, sarcastic, and probably inflammatory language to get my points across, because guess what, y'all? And here's where we're all culpable. It is really hard to get attention or to get clicks or interest if you are not provocative or if you're not abrasive. And what I have noticed about myself is that my way of communicating over the past several years has become more abrasive and less, I guess a way to put it would be less, perhaps humane or compassionate if we're thinking about it in those terms, because that is just phrasing things in a careful way, or phrasing things in a way that don't go right for the jugular. It just doesn't have the same effect. It doesn't get the same traction. And I'm not talking about situations where I'm calling out Me Too liars, which is something that I've done a lot on my channel. As I've looked at different Me Too cases that I believed were hoaxes, starting with the Johnny Depp case. I'm not saying that it's wrong to call those people out when people are doing terrible things, but I'm just saying in general, I look at the way that I interact with people online, and I know a lot of you probably feel the same way. There are so many times when I type something and I post it, and then almost immediately I'm hit with, what did I really do there? Like, what did that really help? Or why didn't I try to phrase things in a kind of a more a nicer conciliatory, not conciliation as in giving in, but just as in like to communicate like, hey, we're both humans. I know we're both basically trying our best to grapple with these really tough things. In Dre De Mateo's situation, she has been very clear about the fact that she was in deep financial shit because she refused on principle the COVID vaccination. And so there was a lot of work, as you know, there was a lot of work that she couldn't get in Hollywood. She claims she was basically blackballed and so forth. I don't even think that people should have to explain their financial situation to post some pretty pictures or sexy pictures on OnlyFans. I really don't. I'm very open minded when it comes to stuff. I do think that porn can have a terrible effect on people, on relationships, and on people who are more prone to addiction when it comes to porn, and the way that I think it's negatively impacting like adolescent sexuality and so forth. So I have a lot of issues with porn, but also I think that there's an inevitability to the sexuality of our culture, and sexuality has always been important in various ways. And so I think sometimes people can't see the forest for the trees, and instead of like going more for these significant problems, let's start having honest conversations about the effects of pornography, perhaps, if there's a problem. It gets into this, oh, women turning into hookers stuff. But I do think it's true of all of us who are online, or almost all of us, that if you put us in a room with the person we're debating with, and maybe turn the cameras off too, right? But put us in a room with the person we're debating with, there would be much more common ground that would be reached. But that is not the nature of social media, and that is not what people want, frankly. I mean, that's the thing too. People, and I'm guilty of this too, people want the spectacle. They want the spectacle. And so as long as people like Tim Pool, or in a much less successful sense, someone like me, as long as we are trying to use social media and YouTube and all that as our creative outlets, we're going to wrestle with the double-edged sword of that, which is the way that it perverts communication between people. I don't mean perverts in a sexual sense, but I just mean the way that it makes it this thing that we all really don't even want, and it's not good for our mental health, but We seem sort of doomed to replicate it. I don't know. Now, I do have to go to work in a little while, and that's why I'm doing such a short stream. I wanted to announce something though, okay? And this is where I get into talking more about this idea of what's going on the right when it comes to women. So there are a number of to the right. I don't like saying right wing or conservative. These labels are just so in flux anyway. But perceived to be right wing or right of center, there are some women that I follow online on Twitter, YouTubers, commentators, people like that. And they have been, some of them have been talking this week about this question of what's going on with the right. Why is the right hemorrhaging women, and should anything be done about that? Or should the right, the right wing just say, well, we're the ones who are correct and screw those women, if they don't see the truth, right? Basically. And Mary Morgan, for instance, who is the co-host of Pop Culture Crisis with Brett Dasovic, she posted what I thought was a really great question, saying, the right seems to be winning over lots of young men, but it seems to be alienating, and she phrased it a bit differently, but it seems to be alienating lots of young women. Can anything be done? And I gave her a really sarcastic response, which I hope she knew was sarcastic. And I wasn't even talking to her. I was talking about the right in general. But I said, well, I would harp on abortion a lot more and talk shit about birth control a lot more and call women sluts more and assert that only full-time motherhood and submissive wifehood are important, and also tell the women that once they hit the wall, they're going to be completely useless and hopeless. Do all of that more, and I'm sure that'll do the trick in getting more right-wing female voters. And I was joking, and there's an example, perfect example there of what I'm talking about, right? With the sort of biting, cutty, sarcastic, abrasive, in your face way that we have to communicate to get clicks and interest online. But I really do think it's an interesting question. And I do think, as someone who, in my mind, I am very centrist, not in the bad wishy-washy way, but just in the fact that I have a lot of very eclectic views. But I consider myself to be, these days, under these particular political conditions, somewhat right of center. And so I thought maybe what I can do is just start an informal series where I try, every few days or every week, to talk about my perspective on this gender question and how it relates to the political arena, and addressing some things that are said at times not only by Tim Pool but by many other commentators. Tucker Carlson, I saw a video with him last week. I think someone was interviewing him, Lex Friedman, perhaps. And Tucker Carlson, apparently, one of his big views on familyhood is that people should be having children in high school. They should be having children as soon as they can, even if they can't. And he says this flat out, even if they can't afford it, and starting in high school. That is a very wow idea, and I would just love to just take an episode of my show and sit down for 10 minutes and unpack that idea. There are raging debates going on about birth control right now, and yes, I do concede that the pill and some forms of hormonal birth control, they've got their issues, but guess what? Pregnancy and childbirth, that's kind of rough on the body and carries its risks too, right? But I would love to get into that debate and do a little research, more research on birth control, and talk about that. I would love to talk about this issue of women's sexuality, and are we overrun with just the hyper-sexualization, over-sexualization of women right now? Marriage, I know, I'm not married. I know a number of people who aren't married because we just want to stay the hell away from that government matrix and the family courts and all that stuff, right? So I think I have a very interesting view of marriage as well, and all these things. So I'm going to start a regular segment. So I'm going to try to do it every week, and maybe it'll just be a short little stream. As you know, I basically stopped streaming because I don't have time. But I'm going to start a short little segment where I just each time I just tackle something that's happened in the news that day, kind of like today with Tim, and the other day with Tim and Drea, or looking at some particular issue related to gender and this question in the political realm. And of course, I'm going to do a segment on abortion too. Let me tell you, okay? For the longest time, I have wanted to stay the hell away from abortion because I know it is such an alienating topic. And I know that there are a number of people in my audience who are very hardcore pro-life. And I am going to, let me just say this. I started off pro-life. I was pro-life until I would say late college, early grad school, not due to a personal experience. People always think that, but no, just an evolution of my beliefs. And I'm very, very pro-choice now, extremely pro-choice. And so I really didn't want to talk about it for the longest because I thought, oh, this is just a needlessly divisive issue. And so why would I want to talk about something that's just going to unnecessarily alienate some of my audience? But you know what? I went on Tim Pool and the topic came up. And one of the most interesting parts of that segment, I think, was when we started going at it, not only about abortion, but about some of my views that are more anti-natalist in the sense of like feeling like we shouldn't necessarily be encouraging women to have lots of kids, and certainly not promoting that as like the only path in life, right? We talked about that. We talked about the evolution of the human species and about women's place in it. And I just have to say, I know that Sam Cedar and the people over at Young Turks or the Majority Report or whatever it is. Sorry, I just don't keep up with that very much. But I know that Sam Cedar, he completely tore Tim up over that exchange that we had about abortion because he clipped a little segment of it in which, frankly, neither Tim nor I came off looking good. We both actually came off at times looking a little confused in that segment, that Cedar clip, which I guess is why he clipped it. But he basically like broke it down, and he and his co-host they just laughed at Tim and just tore him apart, and laughed at me some too as well. But it's interesting to me, though, that that is the segment that they chose because I really do think that that was the most interesting part of our dialogue. You know, I had gone on Tim Pool's show to talk about Me Too and to talk about Marilyn Manson's innocence and to talk about academia and not to talk about abortion or other gender related issues, and instead we ended up getting into all of that. But that was, I think, the most interesting part of the show was when we were really in that. And it felt like to me almost like back when I was in college and you would be in a really good class where people would just start debating in like a deeper, more meaningful philosophical sense. And so I would love for Tim to have me on again now that I'm kind of comfortable with him and his show and the setup and all of that, and I've kind of gotten the nerves out. I would love to go back on there and let's just talk for 2 hours. Just let's Tim and me just talk for 2 hours about all of these issues related to gender and things like that. I think that would be great. But in the meantime, I'm going to start putting out a regular segment. So everybody, let me see what we've got going. I've got to go to work, but I want to thank my super chatters. Andrew Jacobs, great to see you. Kurtz, have a great weekend. Thank you. Dan Campbell, I like when Kurtz or anybody really owns up to her shortcomings while still accepting that she has them. Nice going there, KL. Thank you, Dan, and I always appreciate your support as always. Dan says, thank you for the short stream, Kristen. I can hear a customer screaming for his well done steak, even from over here. You'd better get over to the restaurant soon. Yeah, so I'm a waitress, and that's what he's laughing about. All right, so everybody, thank you. And yeah, I hope you like this and more to come. Bye bye.